Today, we are diving into one of the most unbelievable life stories in all of history. Seriously, it's a journey from being worshipped as a literal living god to being known only by a prison number. This is the incredible, paradoxical story of Puyi, the very last emperor of China. But here's the thing. We're not starting this story in a palace. Nope, we're starting in a prison, specifically the Fushan War Criminals Management Center in Communist China right around 1950. And I want you to meet prisoner number 981. He's weak, he's clumsy, and he's just completely incompetent at pretty much everything.
I mean, this prisoner is a living portrait of helplessness. We're talking about a grown man who's only just recently figured out how to tie his own shoelaces. He struggles with the most basic hygiene, like how to properly brush his teeth. The guards are constantly finding faucets he left running because he just forgets. And why? Because before he landed in this prison, he had never, not once, done a single one of these things for himself. Someone else had always done it all for him.
So this brings us to the absolute core of our story, the central question. How on earth could this guy, this helpless prisoner number 981, have once been the absolute ruler of the Qing dynasty, a living god to nearly a third of all the people on the entire planet? To understand that, we have to go all the way back to the beginning.
Okay, so picture this. The year is 1908. A huge, mysterious procession of imperial guards and servants shows up at a fancy mansion in Beijing. But they're not there for the owner, Prince Chun. No, they are there for his son, his 2-year-old son, a little boy named Puyi. The terrified toddler is literally pulled out of a cupboard, screaming his head off, and whisked away to the Forbidden City. He has just been chosen to be the next emperor of China.
So why pick a 2-year-old, right? Well, here's the crazy part. Puyi wasn't chosen in spite of his age, he was chosen because of it. See, the real power in China was this woman, the Empress Dowager Cixi. For nearly 50 years, she'd been running the show by installing little boys as puppet emperors. Her last puppet was dying, so she needed a new one, fast. A toddler with a loyal, kind of clueless father? He was the absolute perfect choice for her to keep her iron grip on power.
Puyi's coronation, as you can imagine, was completely overwhelming. The 2-year-old just started wailing. He wanted to go home. So his dad, Prince Chun, desperate to quiet him down, leaned in and whispered, "It'll be over soon." Now, while those words might have calmed the little boy down, the court officials who heard them, they took it as a really, really bad omen, a grim prophecy for the entire Qing dynasty. And they weren't wrong.
So Puyi's new home was the Forbidden City, this massive place filled with thousands of servants called eunuchs. Now, these men were castrated to make sure that the emperor was the only fertile man in the entire palace. But this led to a pretty bizarre and, frankly, horrifying practice. There was this powerful tradition that said you could only get to heaven if you were buried whole. So the eunuchs would carry their removed genitals with them at all times, preserved in little jars of salt water. Life as a child god was just as lonely and bizarre as it sounds. Every single day, he'd be dressed by eunuchs in a brand new outfit that would never be worn again. Then he'd lead this huge procession to go visit his mothers, the wives of the previous emperors. His big imperial duty? Mindlessly stamping official documents that he couldn't possibly understand. And with no real love or affection, he developed this really cruel streak, ordering servants to be beaten or to eat dirt just for his own amusement, just because he could.
But, the world outside those palace walls was changing, and fast. Puyi was about to become an emperor without an empire, basically a prisoner in a beautiful golden cage, while the real China was being completely reborn.
In October of 1911, a rebellion kicked off that spread like wildfire across the country. The people were just fed up with Manchu rule and foreign powers meddling in their business. By February 1912, it was all over. The Qing dynasty was finished. But in this really strange deal, Puyi was allowed to give up his throne but continue living like a pretend emperor inside the Forbidden City. And this bizarre setup actually lasted until 1924, when a warlord finally marched in and kicked him out for good.
During his time in this gilded cage, a British man named Reginald Johnston became his tutor, and this guy changed everything. Before Johnston, all Puyi knew were ancient Chinese classics. But after, he was reading Western philosophy, he was wearing English suits, he even cut off his traditional Q hairstyle. He got a bicycle, he made prank calls on a telephone, he started dreaming of a life totally outside of China, maybe even studying at Oxford.
But that escape, it just wasn't meant to be. The dowager consorts who needed him there for their fancy lifestyle, they arranged his marriage when he was just 16. He literally picked his bride from a few tiny photographs. And when he finally met his empress on their wedding night, he had absolutely no idea what to do. I mean, nobody had ever told him. He panicked and just ran away. And with that, his dreams of Oxford, they just evaporated.
So now he's a private citizen, and for the first time, Puyi is finally free. But that freedom, it would lead him down a really dark and catastrophic path, to an alliance that would make him infamous forever.
After being forced out of the Forbidden City, Puyi ended up aligning himself with Imperial Japan. They saw him as the absolute perfect figurehead for their plans. And it was just this tragic echo of his first time as emperor. Once again, he was an emperor in name only, with zero real authority. But having never known any real power, only how to perform it, it was a role he was tragically prepared to accept. This second time, though, as emperor of the Japanese puppet state of Manchukuo, the consequences would be far, far deadlier. For 11 long years, Puyi was a powerless emperor all over again. Only this time, his presence was used to legitimize the brutal Japanese occupation of Manchuria and all of their horrific war crimes. He was a puppet, sure, but he was a willing one, making him complicit in the immense suffering of his own people.
And this brings us full circle, right back to where we started. After Japan's defeat in 1945, Puyi's life took its final, most dramatic turn. He was about to be transformed from an emperor into a citizen.
So after being captured by the Soviets, Puyi was eventually handed over to Mao Zedong's new communist China. And there he went through this process called remolding. It was basically a brutal form of communist brainwashing, forcing prisoners to confess all their sins and embrace the new ideology. The communists knew that if they could turn the ultimate symbol of old-world imperialism into a true believer, it would be their single greatest propaganda victory. For 9 years, in that Fushun prison, Puyi listened to lectures and wrote these endless confessions, forced to really confront the role he played in the Japanese occupation. And it was here, stripped of every title, every privilege, that he finally learned how to tie his own shoes, how to brush his own teeth, and how to become that helpless man we met at the beginning, prisoner number 981.
When you look back, Puyi wore so many different faces throughout his life, didn't he? He was a kidnapped little kid, a cruel boy god, a teenager dreaming of freedom, a puppet emperor involved in crimes against humanity, and then a humble, sorry prisoner. His life was just this dizzying, unbelievable sequence of contradictions. In the final chapter of his life, Puyi became just an ordinary citizen. He moved in with his sister and eventually got a job as a gardener, living out his days quietly in Beijing. I mean, think about that. In a final, surreal twist, the man who was once worshipped as a god in the Forbidden City spent his last years just tending to plants. So, what do we make of a life like this? A man who is born into absolute power but never really held any. A man who was both a victim of his circumstances and a perpetrator of some terrible choices. It leaves us with one last big question. Was Puyi a villain? Was he a victim? Or was he maybe just a mirror, simply reflecting the chaotic, violent, and extraordinary history of 20th century China?